welcome everyone. I am thrilled to welcome you to this evening's program. My name is Martina Droth. I'm the Paul Mellon Director of the Yale Center for British Art. And it is such a pleasure to be opening tonight's exhibition, William Blake, Burning Bright. My first words are thanks and congratulations to the two curators of this exhibition, Elizabeth Wyckoff, the curator of prints and drawings, and Timothy Young, curator of rare books and manuscripts. They have created a real gem of an exhibition, and I'm just so thrilled that you'll all have a chance to look at our incredible Blake collection. Almost 100 works from the collection are on display on the third floor upstairs. William Blake, of course, is such a well-known name, and we often hear him described as a visionary genius, as someone with an incredible imagination. And when you walk around this exhibition, well, I think you see that all laid out in front of you, both in terms of his remarkable creativity, using word and image, and his technical ingenuity. And one of the aspects that the exhibition really explores is this, the infernal method, as he called it, which he invented to bring his poetry and his images to life on the page together. The majority of the works are from our founding collection, the Paul Mellon collection. But if you're the type of person like me who reads credit lines, you'll also see that there are a number of really exceptional loans. And I want to give you an example. Go around the show and you'll find it. There's an incredible copper plate that we've displayed, and it was an important work to include because we're talking about this printing method and his commitment to engraving. And it's this large plate that Blake made for his engraving for Chaucer's Canterbury Pilgrims. Not many of Blake's printing plates survive in the world. And the astonishing thing, and the reason I'm telling you this, is because you will see that we didn't have to go very far to borrow it. We didn't have to go across the world to find it. It was right next door at the Yale University Art Gallery. So I'm so grateful to my colleagues at the gallery, at the Beinecke Library and Yale Libraries for sharing so generously the incredible collections that we have here at Yale, and that make a project like this even richer and more remarkable. To complement the exhibition, we've just published a new book in our series. It's the second volume in our new collections about the YCBA collection series with Elizabeth, the lead author. And if you enjoy the exhibition and the works in the exhibition, I think you'll also enjoy the book, which has beautiful illustrations throughout. This is our first exhibition on William Blake in almost 30 years. But Blake has always been an important figure for the YCBA, partly because we have such an incredible collection of almost 900 works by Blake, but also because Blake is such an important name at Yale, and because of the important scholarship that both Yale and the museum has supported over the decades. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the scholar who curated this museum's first ever William Blake exhibition, which was in 1982. And that was the late David Bindman, who sadly passed away earlier this summer. I know that many of you here knew David. He was an extraordinary art historian, not only in relation to Blake, but in so many fields. And in fact, I knew David when I was a student in London. I knew him as a sculpture historian. I read his incredible book on Roubiliac that he co-authored with Malcolm Baker. And then many years later, when I came here, I came to know him as David, the historian of the print, the historian of works on paper, and of course, the expert on Blake. His 1982 exhibition that he curated here, William Blake, His Art and Times, was profoundly influential on how we continue to understand and see Blake. So today's program is dedicated to David Bindman's memory and to the important legacy of scholarship that he left behind. So I am now pleased to hand you over to a conversation between the two curators, Elizabeth and Tim, moderated by our dear friend, Dick Brodhead, who is the A. Bartlett Giamatti Professor of English Emeritus at Yale, but he's much better known to us here at the YCBA as our former interim director. So welcome back, Dick. There'll be time for questions afterwards. We'll pass around microphones. People who are streaming in or listening into the live stream, you can use the Q&A function to ask your questions. And before I leave you, let me just mention that when we end our program in here, please join us on the third floor in the exhibition, where our esteemed faculty colleagues, Jill Campbell, Professor of English, and Tim Barringer, Paul Mellon, Professor of Art History, will be giving informal talks about their favorite Blake works in the exhibition. And then please also join us for a reception in the library court. But now, without further ado, I hand over to Dick, Tim, and Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I know you want to say something to start.
So I want to spend just a moment or two paying tribute again to David Bindman. So to grapple with a figure as complex and storied as William Blake is to stand on the shoulder of giants. And I'm one of those curators who has benefited from David Bindman's decades-long endeavor to bring Blake and his work into fuller, closer view. David joined Blake and his visionary partners in Eternity just a few short months ago, still actively contributing. Like so many scholars of British art, his involvement with this institution was deep. As Martina already noted, it was solidified with his 1982 exhibition, William Blake, His Art and Times. Then director Duncan Robinson lauded David as the ideal collaborator and chief architect of the show. Here's David showing an exhibited page from the incredible unique copy of Blake's watercolor illustrations to the poems of Thomas Gray. David's art history ranged from the sculpture of Roubiliac to the groundbreaking Menil-Harvard project to document the image of the Black in Europe and the Americas, and many other ways. Blake, though, was always central to his scholarship, from his first article in 1966 to his final collaboration last year with the Fitzwilliam Museum, the exhibition William Blake's Universe. There have been many tributes to David's brilliance and his humanity, his drive to collect, and his commitment to keeping the real-life objects central to teaching art history. How many of you can say that you thought Blake was a poet and didn't even know that he also made art? It's not too much to say that he brought the modern study of the complete Blake, the artist and poet, the prophet, the printmaker and publisher, the driver of his own destiny to life.
Great.
So thank you, David.
Well, every exhibit like this is in an acknowledged or unacknowledged way based on the work that's been done by everybody before us who paid attention. So thank you for honoring that contribution. But now let's turn to you guys. When I was the interim director of this museum for 8 months or something, which was great fun because I got to see how does a museum work when it's about to reopen? How does it prepare to re-emerge, to spring back into existence? I also got to meet lots of people I did not previously know in my other Yale lives, Elizabeth and Tim being two of them. And both of you were fairly new at that time. You've both been here about 2 years. It's probably not too late to say welcome to you. And fun for me to have your company. I'd only say about myself, I did my PhD at Yale in the English department. I got my PhD in 1972. And at the time when I got a PhD in English, Blake was probably at his absolute zenith in the world of literary study. The work of Northrop Frye, the work of Harold Bloom, these were books you would not willingly have it known you had not read. And I myself can remember the very chairs in which I read the Four Zoas, Jerusalem. I've read all these prophetic books. That used to be part of literary training. It still is, but in a different way. So let's start. So let me ask you a question Martina touched on, but just quickly, one of you, how does it happen that this museum has such a vast collection of Blake?
I'll jump in. The reason it has a collection of Blake is because I would say Paul Mellon went to Yale, and he studied with Chauncey Brewster Tinker, who taught him and a whole generation of, at that time, young men, his favorites and the canon. And Mellon loved his time at Yale. I mean, he expresses it over and over again. And he saved all the books that he had when he was at Yale and then at Cambridge, and he would read them and respond to them. And he wrote poetry.
That's right. Yeah.
Mostly, some of it was published as undergraduate, but then he wrote poems for friends. There are books, there are letters.
Right.
Right. So poetry was a part of his life. Blake was a part of his life, and I think that if you have a teacher like Tinker, who, the history tells us, was very compelling in getting you to understand and also appreciate what he liked too. So Mellon also having some family money, as we know.
Oh, I heard
Yes,
that.
heard that. So he has a desire to actually have something that is a Blake original. And then in 1941.
And then in the very early 1940s, Blake was really the first. I mean, we know him here at the British Art Center as someone who collected British art, but Blake, he collected 20 years before he did that.
It's actually incredibly interesting to me. I didn't know for a very long time that the great majority of the famous paintings in this museum were collected over an 8-year period or so.
Yes.
Not like all his life he was collecting British art, but he collected Blake before he collected Turner, before he collected Reynolds or Gainsborough, right?
Yes.
He collected them as a bibliophile, so they were
That's
the books.
okay. That's right. So the fact that there was a book dimension was not a trivial part of it.
Exactly, and he also, I mean, he was a great reader too.
Okay,
and I'm
sure.
not being paid to say this, but Mellon was really, he collected books all his life.
Yeah.
He read very deeply, and when he liked something, like for example, when he liked the work of Carl Jung, he dedicated decades to publishing Jung's works and works in the spirit of Jung. And then also in the 1950s, he and some other admirers of Blake called themselves the William Blake Society,
Right.
had the idea that to make Blake more accessible, they should not just have, editions, which are useful, but have facsimiles, so you can encounter them in that same.
Beautiful rare art ones, all of
Exactly.
which he presided over. And
Exactly. So by the Trianon Press, and so for about 25 years, he's the main funder of, I think almost every illuminated book was done in an facsimile edition.
Yep.
And we're very lucky and we're very happy. We have several copies of those on view that you can leaf through because there's the book art continuum is also something we contend with here because just the books mostly were disbound, which as a librarian, I
frown on.
I wasn't consulted, but I've come to peace with because it allows us to show them as in the sequence and these beautiful things. So, but we can also look at facsimiles and have that experience of the book as a bound codex.
And luckily, we also have some of the original books still in their bindings.
Which is not of trivial interest.
Exactly.
So this is a question that I really look forward to hearing the answer to. Tim, you are someone who works in rare books and manuscripts.
Yes.
You did not begin life as a Blake scholar, right? You began life as a connoisseur and scholar and handler of all the dimensions of rare books and manuscripts. Elizabeth, you didn't begin life as a Blake scholar. You know everything about the history of prints, the history of drawings, and all of a sudden there's Blake in front of you. And I'm just interested, not the longest answer you could give, but just a brief answer, because we'll get into more details in a little bit. How did Blake start up to you? How did Blake look to you coming from the lens of the history of prints and drawings? You know what question I'm going to ask you next.
Okay.
So Elizabeth.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so I think Blake came to me and I came to him as someone who was an incredible innovator in the history of printmaking. He did just extraordinary things, and he did it at a moment when many other people were doing extraordinary things, but he really stands out in that way. And I love that he's, kind of everything he does is imbued with both his poetry, his artistry, his imagination, and his innovation, and his powers of invention.
Right. So now, okay, if you're interested in rare books and manuscripts, and then all of a sudden there's Blake.
Yeah.
What makes Blake interesting in a different way or a differential way in that field from anybody else?
Okay. I also have to correct you that I started off a little bit more simpler, driving bookmobiles for public library, but at the same time, which was fun. It was wonderful. But I was at University of Tulsa and I had Tom Staley as my professor. I don't know if you know Tom Staley, but he was a force of nature, mostly as a Joycean, but I had introduction to British poetry and British literature with him. And of course I don't know if anybody had this, the Norton anthology, this doorstop. It's printed on onion skin paper. And so he says, just read this much, and it's like 400 pages. And so I encountered it just as the words with really beautiful notes. So Songs of Innocence and Experience, I just found, and I saw that was turned over. I read part of America Prophecy, but I was also reading Faulkner at the same time. Okay, which visionary do I want to follow? But So for me, it came purely as poetry. And I think that there may be like a couple plates at University of Tulsa Library. So I saw them. But for me, the image work, it was never any didactic device that I was interested to until I landed at Meineke, and there is the Chauncey Tinker collection, one of which is upstairs. So at that point, I also became in a way responsible for that collection and had to start from scratch. But that happened when I came to Yale with so many things. I learned about people here that were just glossed over as an undergraduate, and it's a fabulous thing to have that as your work.
Well, you all have to buy this new Blake book as quickly as possible, because it has not only fantastic illustrations, but it has excellent essays by Elizabeth and by Sarah Weston. And the essay by Sarah Weston begins by making the simplest of points, which is for most people in the world, or at least most people with literary training, Blake means pages of print with the works of William Blake. And so even though I was in my undergraduate days at a place with all this visual material, Blake was print Blake.
Right.
But if I were you, I would also have found it striking that Blake was a bookmaker poet. I mean, a lot of poets have written poems that were collected in books, but Blake made the books in which his poems were collected. So we'll get to all that in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. No, this is a lightning round question.
Okay.
What was the single hard? Okay, so all of a sudden here you are. Okay, I know everything about prints and drawings. I know a lot about rare books. Here's Blake. They've got one of the maybe 4 best collections in the world. What are we going to do? How are we going to set this up so people can see the interest of it? What was the single hardest thing? And what was the single? I'll use a word that's used in my family, though it doesn't exist in English. What was the single funnest thing you did? Elizabeth.
I think the funnest was collaborating with colleagues in conservation and in the installation to figure out a way to really foreground the page, the full page in those books that were just found.
Okay.
Lightning round.
Wait, you didn't say
You didn't say the hardest one.
the hardest one yet.
Oh, maybe it was all easy.
Leaving things out.
I would have thought leaving things out would have been a very hard. And your funnest moment?
So my funnest moment is it's always a joy to do a show because I get to study, I get to read, and I get to dive into the world of William Blake. But then you realize there are millions of words. So a little bit of the trepidation is like, so what do we have to say? Well, what is our narrative? What will be unique, or it doesn't have to be unique, but what will be the message and what will be the display? And it's really the funnest thing, I'd say then from that is that working with colleagues who were constantly giving us notes in the best way and saying, this is good, but will that be parsable by somebody who maybe has never read Blake? But will it also be something that will satisfy somebody who's a Blake scholar? And so the show went through so many iterations. Yeah, I bet. And then, so single most pleasing moment so far is going in along those 3 bays where they have the poems of Thomas Gray, and seeing them lit like Tiffany's. It's if you haven't seen it, it's absolutely gorgeous installations. Thank you. So seeing it actually come to life. Yeah.
Well, because it's been I know you spent years preparing this thing. And then one fine day, people come in and install it. And then a few days later, people come in and look at it. And it has to be all just so. One of you had the fun. I got to go through I always call them exhibits, but Martina taught me that only grotesque Americans refer to exhibits. They're always to be called exhibitions. So I went through the exhibition with the 2 of you before it was open to the public. And I would say the funnest moment for me of that was Tim telling me what was so fun about the very first thing in the show. Can we see that? There it is. Okay.
So this is a plate from The Gates of Paradise, which is a book of images, somewhat resembles an emblem book, and it's very small again. And that was a challenge.
Give us an idea how very small.
This small. Okay.
Really small.
Really, really small. And the words and the letters are even small. And several people have asked me saying, how did Blake do that? Did he have a magnifying glass? No, he trained for years to do it and backwards. Okay. Right. So this we chose, it was a bit of a bet because it's like, okay, you start with a very small thing. Usually you want to start with a blockbuster. Right. But this is one of the most popular images on their website. Okay. People love it. It is a bit disarming because it's not overly heavily Blakean. It's a very simple
Right.
thing. Even if you don't even if you don't see the words, you get the story. It's somebody striving or wanting something that's out of reach, desire, right? And we thought, okay, let's start with that, but not sort of pull back a little bit from over explaining it. And that's one of the other things as well, is that the labels are, it situates, but without trying to claim absolute authority.
Well, I've been to so many museums where one leaves having read all the captions and forgot to look at the pictures.
Yeah.
And so that's not something I really admire. So I actually, I like the medium and quality here.
Yeah.
You told me it's the size of books that used to be for children with very simple images to teach you good behavior and things of that sort. So it's this tiny little book with this picture, which is, what would you call it? It's like, you'd call it an abstraction. You'd call it this is a work of graphic art. Is that?
Yeah, or an allegory. Yeah.
Or an allegory. Yeah. Okay. And at the bottom, it just says, I want. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what you get to do if you do an exhibition. You get to figure out how to start it.
Right.
And then quickly enough, we wheel our way around to probably the works of Blake that are known most universally are the early poems, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. And I think something that makes this so thrilling to come to is, you read them in high school or you read them in college, but that's different from getting to see what those were when they were published, because they weren't published in the Norton Anthology originally, which may surprise many people.
Right.
They were published in these exquisite volumes of which you yourself have, what, how many copies do you have of it?
3.
How many copies are in existence in the entire world?
Circa 50.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we have like 6% of
6%.
all copies of Songs of Innocence,
Nobody
Songs of
counted.
Experience. So let's just jump into a book of poems by Blake, because here already we're at Blake, not just somebody who writes poems, but somebody who writes books of poems, right? Okay, so here's the beginning, the first page of Songs of Innocence. How do you make a Blake book of poems? Take turns, okay?
So you start by writing the poem, but then
presumably.
But then when you're Blake, in 1788, his kind of dearly beloved, just deceased younger brother, who was an aspiring artist, he and his brother and a group of other people had been already talking for the most of the 1780s about how they could publish their own work.
Okay.
And so Blake goes to bed one night and his brother comes to him and says, okay, Will, this is how you do it. And William's wife, Catherine, who was his studio assistant, among many other things, went out in the morning, gathered the materials together, and brought them home. And they started to figure out how they could take a copper plate, and William could write his text backwards, put his own images, dispose it all around the page as he wanted to, and then print it on kind of the nicest and best paper. So you figure out a way that you can publish your own work the way you want without being beholden to anything.
So, okay, so it's non-market publishing, right? I mean, you don't send your manuscript to a publisher and get a rejection letter or an acceptance letter, right? He was self-published in the most literal sense, right? Okay, but what you just said is, could you, if you wouldn't mind just going back one quick second, I know how important this slide is. No, that's forward. There it is. Yeah, there we are. Okay, so you've written the poem, but now on the copper plate, you don't just write the poem. Okay, what you explained to me is you have to write the poem backward. You have to etch the poem backward. Okay, you know that was said of Ginger Rogers that she could do everything Fred Astaire could do, except in high heels and backward. So Blake could do everything Wordsworth could do, except backward. So I mean, to be able to handwrite, so you understand, this isn't printed word poetry. This is like calligraphy, right? I mean, where the words themselves are part of the art.
Yeah.
And then, okay, and what do you imagine? Do you imagine he did the visuals at the same time as the poem, or?
I think yes.
Yeah.
I do imagine that he did that because it was all very integrated, and they're all on the same plate, and that's really the whole idea. It's
right.
It's also like illuminated manuscripts, so
Okay,
medieval
okay.
manuscripts. So he's also thinking about it that way,
Okay.
having that integration of image.
And you know, he must have done it, you know, he composed the poems presumably separately, but you know he did the drawings because the drawings go in and out of the words, right? So that's to say the words are yet more sinuous shapes in a visual sense. If you didn't understand English, they'd be part of the artwork of it, right? And if you do, then the stuff crawling around the edges and all through it. Okay, so if we say Blake is a poet, like that doesn't really give the message, right? Because Blake is a graphic artist poet and other things too. There are poems by Blake for which there aren't illustrations, right? The Mental Traveler would be an example or something like that. But the poems that Blake really spent his life on are the ones where he wrote the poem, he etched it backward.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit more about how, okay, if you want to go home and try this yourself, Elizabeth will now give you a few helpful tips.
So you take a copper plate.
Thank you.
Maybe,
Oh, wait.
maybe we go
Okay,
to slide 13 for a quick moment. So basic primer and printmaking, and I know there are many people of you who know that already. But if you look at the top line, what Blake did and what he really invented was relief etching. So where you see the red, that's where his drawing and writing is. And where you see those little kind of crumbly pits, that's where the acid bit into the plate, leaving the image at the top there. So that's
so
what
he didn't
printed.
etch the image into the plate.
No, he left it on the top of the plate.
He left it on the top of the plate.
So normally, if you think about engraving, that's the one in the middle. You're carving directly into a copper plate with a sharp instrument, and then the ink goes into those lines. And then when you print it, you force it out. With an etching, again, you create the lines, but you do it, the acid is going to actually bite them. So he's doing completely the opposite of a normal intaglio and etching or engraving, but he's using the principles of relief printing or woodcut, where the image that you print is on the top.
Okay, so here's how far I've gotten in making. I've decided to make my book. I'll have a little time after this. I'm sure I can go home and get a copper plate on the way. Okay, so I'm gonna write my poem backward on the surface, and then when I pour the acid on, around it will be eaten away, but it will stay on the top. But then what happens about the coloring?
And then he'll print it, and he prints it those of you who've been in the exhibition, you'll see his words and images are printed in many different colors. It can be blue, green, sometimes black, orange in Jerusalem. So he prints that text and what's the images that are on the plate in whatever color he wants, and then he adds watercolor on top. So sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between where is the watercolor and where is the printed area. And there's one beautiful little moment in the middle of the 1790s, and Sarah Weston talks about this nicely. Her essay is about color, so if you want to know more about this, go to Sarah Weston in the book. But for one precious little moment of a few decades,
Slide 11.
He printed everything in color. So in these you have a little bit of watercolor, but not only the raised parts, but he managed to get the color into those very slightly lower parts. To print everything there.
So
and he and Catherine, I also.
So hold on one little second. He did this by going to his lavishly appointed studio. Where did Blake do his work? Give us the room in which Blake's poems are being. I mean, because you understand, the poet was also a draftsman. The poet was also an etcher. The poet was, in other words, a complete graphic artist who was also a printmaker because he printed them himself, right? Right.
Yeah. I mean, his apprenticeship was in engraving. So at the age of 10, he was writing poems, but also taking drawing lessons. A few years after that, he started his apprenticeship in engraving, where he also was sent to Westminster Abbey to make drawings there that were later used for engravings. So what his real training was in engraving. So that's what he knew, and I think that's what enabled him to be so inventive with creating relief etching.
I find this very interesting because the question I have asked myself and thought I might ask you is it correct to say that Blake is an outsider artist, right? Outsider artists are usually untaught, untrained, don't know about the canon of practice, which isn't true. He had lessons at the Royal Academy. He drew from the cast of the Royal Academy. He certainly didn't have a posh upbringing, but he had, in a sense, a sort of classical training.
In engraving.
In engraving.
In the 18th century, if you were trained to become an engraver, then you had a livelihood because you could always be illustrating books and doing all kinds of engraving for other people.
Okay. So Tim, just in the world of authorship, can you think of other authors who were in charge of as many? In other words, authorship isn't just the production of the words.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, all the different aspects of it. Can you think of other?
Leonard and Virginia Woolf.
Okay, sure. Okay, so she and her husband had a press in the basement.
Exactly, but they also her sister did most of the illustrations of the jackets like that. That's one of the
that's a good
classic 20th century ones. And
okay.
We could do other ones like this, but I think that Blake coming at it, having an artistic training is more unique. A lot of times there will be writers, and also like Jean Dubuffet, when he first sort of started the company of Art Brut, he used whatever materials he had to make both images and poetry as well, right? But Barry's an artist as well. So there are other forms, and maybe this is the time to sort of grant Blake sort of the primacy as somebody who said you could do this. You could actually gather the materials and the methods and the skills and make something that was your own process. It's also a system of control, right? So you don't have an editor, you don't have a proofreader, you have yourself and your help.
You are everything. Okay, this museum has just hired a new designer. But guess what? Blake didn't have to hire a designer because he was the designer.
He was the designer,
right?
exactly.
Museums hire communications people. Blake didn't have to do the communications.
He didn't have to do a press release.
He was everything.
Right.
And when I asked you a minute ago where his studio was, it was
in his home, wherever he was living.
One room usually one room on the first floor, and a bedroom on the second floor, and everything else of daily life happened on the first floor.
The kitchen, the food, and the printing press in the middle of the house.
Yes.
Okay, so this is domestic. And you mentioned a minute ago, if we were to ask, you know how you found out in the Renaissance that sometimes Titian only did the face and then someone else came along, the students did the other parts. Blake's studio helpers were?
His wife, Catherine.
His wife.
And the visions that came to him, that inspired him.
His friends in eternity.
His friends.
You want to say something about his friends in eternity? There might be people in this room who aren't familiar with that concept.
Okay, well, a third way to come to Blake is by reading him as extracted or communicated by other authors who may be putting at the forefront his demeanor and his state of mind, which is to say, Blake is a crazy inventor, right? That's the takeaway from so much sort of the mythology, the story, and literally in his lifetime, rumors about him being, incarcerated in Bedlam Hospital, right? So,
which of course he wasn't.
He wasn't,
right?
And the tropes go around all the time that somebody who makes art. That, as I was talking to you, that Fairfield Porter quotation, that art that basically confronts you with its illogical immediacy, right, is something that I don't understand it, so it must be just totally outside of my cognition, i.e. it must be crazy, right? So, what was the question again?
Well, I'm thinking, I frequently...
the vision.
Okay.
So
here's a quote from Mrs. Blake. Mrs. Blake, don't forget, Mr. Blake did not get up and leave for the office in the morning. He went downstairs to the other room in your two-room apartment, which is the office. And you, of course, didn't go after your job. You went downstairs and were his studio assistant. He taught her how to watercolor. He taught her how to read.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So it's an extraordinary relationship. She's Catherine Blake, who I don't know that much about, but she famously said of her husband, "I did not have much of Mr. Blake's company because he was often in paradise."
Right.
And I think also one of the reasons why we loved starting the exhibition with the Gates of Paradise for children, because thinking about, I really see him as kind of living in all these worlds. I have a quote, if I may. There are a number of letters from Blake that survive, and I want to read from one that he wrote to his patron, Thomas Butts, who is really one of his most devoted patrons, who commissioned works over 20 years illustrating the Bible. So where you see the drawings upstairs of just, kind of full-fledged watercolors, a vision of images from the Bible. Those are things that he did for Thomas Butts. And he spent 3 years living with another patron, William Haley, on the banks of the ocean. The only time that Catherine and Blake lived outside of London. And Haley, of course, really wanted to support Blake, but he also wanted him to become gainfully employed and be engraving more illustrations and things like that. So at the end of this 3 years, Blake had really had it and needed to come back. And this is sort of his state of mind at that moment. And now I may say to you, what perhaps I should not dare to say to anyone else, that I can alone carry on my visionary studies in London unannoyed, and that I may converse with my friends in eternity, see visions, dream dreams and prophecy, and speak parables unobserved and at liberty from the doubts of other mortals. Perhaps doubts proceeding from kindness, but doubts are always pernicious. If a man is the enemy of my spiritual life, while he pretends to be a friend of my corporeal, he is a real enemy.
It's amazing. So first of all, the point that in the city is a better place to live a visionary life than in the country. This is not what's generally known. But my friends from eternity. I mean, it's not like this person had like an imaginary friend or like E.T. or somebody like that. Nevertheless, if you don't take seriously the notion that Blake spent a lot of his mental existence in some state for which my friends for eternity was the name. I don't know. These are quotes I've loved since forever. How do you know but every bird that cuts the airy way is not an immense world of delight closed by your senses 5? We see with our senses, but we're imprisoned by our senses.
Right.
But what if you could see through the prison of your senses and see the world of immense delight? This would presumably be your friends for eternity. This is another one. This is right after the part about the infernal printing method in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite.
Yeah.
It's the uncleansed state of our perception that gives us the finite world. But if we could cleanse our perception, then we would see the infinite world.
Yes.
And in hell, corrosives are cleansed.
Okay, and in hell, because of course that passage comes from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, it's explained.
But first, let's say hello to Socrates, right?
Where'd he come from?
He visited one night. So
another friend of eternity.
The visionary heads is that he was staying up late with
the painter John Varley.
And they would be up till the wee hours.
Right.
And Blake would say, well, I'm going to ask the person I want to talk to come to me. And they would sit, Socrates would sit, and he would draw the picture of Socrates. And now the question is, okay, what do you do with that? I mean, what do you do with James Merrill's master poem, which is dictated by the spirits from beyond?
Okay, sure. Sure. What do you do with the concept of inspiration at all for them?
Exactly.
What do you do with the idea of a gift or a possession or something like that, which is one of the oldest tropes for all poetry?
Exactly.
Could we go back for a minute to that book of Urizen slide that we had up a second ago? Okay. When you walk into this exhibit, the very first thing. Exhibition.
Exhibition.
I mean, I am a vulgar American, Martina. You know this is true. So why should I try to hide it? When you go in, you see this tiny little I want, and then you wheel in, and then you're in the world of the first engraved poems. And so let me just keep this up for 1 second, but just really quickly, one of the, you had to, everything that appears as if it was self-evident in the exhibit had to be decided upon.
Right.
And so, Songs of Innocence existed for many years before the Songs of Experience was published. So it's not as if they're not potentially separate. But you have them, you show us the book, which is great to be able to see the whole thing he made. And then you have poems paired with the Song of Innocence and the Song of Experience that it seems to hark to.
Right.
You want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, we're blessed to have 3 copies of the book, right? And in the 2 that are disbound, we were able to sort of make a matrix of which plates we had and how they reacted to each other, because there's also 2 sides printing and single side printing, right? So we worked through them and said, okay, what stories can we tell?
Right.
And there's a really wonderful small display stand that shows double sides in plexi, And that is a discussion about the printing method and the colors, and you
Right.
can see the same
That's
page
right.
in different colors with
Right.
different type
Right.
of watercolor. And our friends from conservation did amazing work in helping with that. But then we also show just 7 plates of innocence, 7 plates of experience for
Right.
fun. And then the 4 that are the pairs
Right.
are the classic thing that when you're studying it in English literature or world literature, where Blake was in that, the first 1789 and the 1794 volumes, right? He was sort of the first full flush of this project that he practiced most of his life, which is how do we balance and cope with the state of innocence and the loss of that innocence into the adult world where experience starts to sort of like beat us down, right?
Sure.
So you have poems that have the literal same title, The Chimney Sweeper.
Okay.
And it's him, first of all, saying that he actually has faith that's going to save
Right.
him through this horrible indentured
That's right.
servitude that his father sold him into.
Right.
But then in the second one, a voice comes in and says, well, but actually the king and the god and the government are making,
Right.
are surviving out of your misery.
Yeah.
So he doesn't mince words, and he also is his own publisher, so nobody's going to censor him. It's a very, social justice moment where he's saying, no, your misery is actually the product of systems of control,
Of
right?
conditions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's
Okay.
3
Okay.
others where they talk to each other, but also the most famous one is The Lamb and the Tiger, which is the very lovely and sort of essential question about like God's creation. God's creation is both tender but also terrifying. And we'd love to hear a little bit of that poem, perhaps.
Well, I don't know how much time we're going to have a little of that poem. But what's the beginning of the one? Give me the beginning of the divine image.
The divine image is right back here.
Pity, something, mercy, mild, iota.
Divine image, page 18.
You guys, the whole point is this is an invitation to you. Go upstairs and look at them, and then go to the room in the corner of the exhibit where there are the texts of Blake, and you can sit and read them, which is they're actually not easy to read in the.
You want to read? There it is, page 18. Right?
Magnifying glasses to help.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. To mercy, pity, peace, and love, all pray in their distress, and to those virtues of delight, return their thankfulness. These are what was sometimes called the Christian virtues,
Exactly.
right? And that's on one poem. And then next to it, we have the other one, the human abstract. Pity would be no more if we did not make somebody poor. And mercy no more could be if all were as happy as we. Pity takes place in a world of manufactured inequalities in which you feel sympathy across a boundary you are complicit in creating, and you're enjoying the benefit of it, even as you extend your pity across it. Blake ironic is as bitterly ironic as you can find in literature. But the interesting thing is, it's not as if that cancels out innocence. I mean, otherwise you would just have songs of experience. Right?
Exactly.
And so you have this lyrical phase and these beautiful, beautiful, I guess I just have to pause and say this. What is the mind supposed to do as you look at a page? Look at the human abstract there.
Yep.
Okay, there's the text. To read the text, we have to focus on the words, and we have to activate that cognitive process by which we decipher symbols, and especially handwriting now, into words. And then we understand that those words can be read as poetry, and there it is. But then all the stuff going on around it, right? It's like a completely different cognitive, this is a way of putting this in a question. Can you read the image and the words at the same time? I mean, Blake made them in order to efface the separation of verbal art and graphic art.
Exactly. And for this one, I mean, it's interesting. There's some, especially in the prophecies,
Right.
where the pictures can be appreciated just by themselves as really
Of
beautiful.
course.
And they seem to be at a counterpoint to the sort of like the dire prophetic view that he has of
Right.
the world, right?
Sure.
There's actually angels floating up there, right? But this one, the human abstract, is a little bit closer, and maybe it's one of the few plates that really is like illustrative, because in the further parts of the poem, he really talks about humility taking root, and that there's a tree that grows in nature, and where does it grow? In the human brain. So
Right.
this one has a little bit more sort of like verisimilitude between the
Sure.
poetry and the
Yes.
image.
It's-
But the other ones are just, they're gorgeous, and you maybe if you can't read the poetry, this is the divine image you take with you. You take the.
I do find it interesting. One of the things I learned from you two guys is that although Blake supported himself a lot of his life as an illustrator, his work isn't really based on the idea. First, there's the text, and then there's some pictures that illustrate it, right? In other words, a different art form. That the graphic art and the poetry, which is itself graphic art, enjoy total pride of place and equality in this work, and there they are. And presumably, this is based on some idea of audience. Can I just ask you? Who did Blake imagine his audience would be for these things? It's all very well to control every aspect of your production. This means you don't have a publisher. It means you don't have a distributor. It means you don't have an you don't have an agent. You don't have any of those things.
Well,
What's your?
I have another quote.
Okay.
Since I was leading
Both are the best answers.
leading the poetry reading to the English majors, and I thought so. It's someone who in 1820 was announcing in a very sort of weird backhanded way in the London Review. His name is Thomas Griffiths Wainwright, and he was a student of Fuseli, and he was announcing like the book Jerusalem, which is up there in a couple of bays upstairs. And he talks about it as an account of an ancient, newly discovered illuminated manuscript, which has the name Jerusalem, the emanation of the giant Albion. It contains a good deal about one Los, who it appears is now and hath been from the creation the sole and fourfold dominator of the celebrated city of Golgonooza. The doctor assures me, this is the person who's talking about it, that the redemption of mankind hangs on the universal diffusion of the doctrines broached in the manuscript. So he's pretending it's a medieval manuscript that's just been discovered, but the redemption of mankind. So I think part of his audience is about really kind of saving, in a way.
Yes.
I think so,
One person at a time.
and not saving the world by sending humanitarian assistance, because that's the last thing Blake has in mind. It's saving the world by teaching people that we live in the prisons of received understanding. We lived in the prisons of our unclean senses. We live in the prisons of what to Blake are false understandings, that the spiritual is different from the material, that the soul is different from the body, that man is different from woman in some fundamental way. And so Blake's work has this corrosion of distinctions to bring you back to the place where you too would see a world of delight. Well, I don't know. We didn't clear this at headquarters.
So I'm wondering if you were not the emeritus, but you were the Giamatti professor now, and you were going to be proposing a seminar on Blake, how would you present it to your students? Or him and it.
Well, I've become so interested in Blake now I've actually reread a lot of it in connection with your work. And some of the things I really haven't read forever. Blake wrote. Let me get to that in 1 second. How would I do it? I used to teach a seminar on prophetism, on the phenomenon of people who thought of themselves as the bearers of prophetic, privileged truth to a fallen world. And that had all kinds of people in it, Nat Turner slave revolt, John Brown, all kinds of things. But Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell was the absolutely perfect thing to teach it. But now if I were to teach it, I would have to come over here and have you guys just look at this. I can look at the printed page and see that it says Jerusalem and giant Albion. But what happens to the eye when you look at this page? It's so. How do you make this? How did someone make that?
You take 20 years of your life.
Okay.
Sit in your room, buy a little bit of gold. And like, but this is the so for
you've done 50 years of your life before
exactly
you start that.
You have the moment,
but preparing.
But bibliographically, the point is that this is Paul Mellon was able to acquire and it resides here. The only fully colored full edition of
all 100.
But as he said, when he had completed the hand coloring and the addition of the gold elements there in 1820, he said, well, nobody's going to buy it because I've invested so much in it. And
nobody can afford to pay.
Exactly right. And it stayed with him for the remainder of his life.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing to me about Blake, because it certainly is true. You say save the world, and I say not in a humanitarian way, but in a visionary way, right? I mean, to awaken the visionary capacity. I would say that's Blake's project, right? Blake's history is the history of the fall and the redemption is in the recovery of each individual's power of vision or creativity, right? Or delight. And there he is. But you're doing this by writing these volumes, which you have control of every feature of, but which have no public life.
Right. Right. But
the book of which there are the book of which there were the most copies had 30 copies. And even those were printed like over many years, right? And hand colored each one.
Before we leave the sort of the mission of Blake, if you could show slide 24, please. So this was a page from Jerusalem, and it's actually a page I like because I've been in classrooms where Blake has been taught, and folks will say, "Oh, that's just writing. Let's skip over it." But I think this is as beautiful a graphic print as
always remembering that every bit of it was written backward.
Backwards, just like that, in high heels. But so right here, I enlarge it, circle it, like so. This is quoted over and over again. Blake says, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create."
Okay.
There are very few things that centralize or get to the heart.
Okay.
But I think this couplet is very good because he's coming from the age of reason when systems start to dominate, right? And he goes, okay, there are systems, but wait, let me get ahead of it. I'm going to make my own system. And it's like I'm going to deal with the explanation by explaining more fully because I don't want to debate it because I just need to get on with my art.
And when you go upstairs, okay, you'll see the first little picture,
Yeah.
then the Songs of Innocence. Those are lyrics made in a book form.
Yes.
But then you get to what was really the work of Blake's lifetime, these prophetic books, which are works of narrative,
Yeah.
right? They're narrative works of prophecy. The Jerusalem has what, 100? 100 pages, okay, I mean, just look how incredibly gorgeous they are. But then you get this by system. Of course, there's like the Linnaean system and de Cuvier and stuff like that at his time. But his system is like a system of mythology, right? Yeah. There are these characters who just recur and recur and recur. Would you just go back for one quick second to the Book of Horizon, the old guy at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. On your left, all right, this is a character you see so many times. This is one of Blake invented this person, and then he tells the story over and over again. In Blake's world, we live in a religious universe in the presence of a false god. Someone persuaded people going back some period that the sacred is different from the human, that the soul is different from the body, and then erected a figure as God who people worship and therefore become subordinate by means of. And this person called I imagine it's pronounced Horizon. It's the Greek word for horizon or the drawing of boundaries. He's the person who creates boundaries. And so you look at him and you see he's got Moses's tablets of the law behind him, and he's got two hands out there writing. What is he doing with his foot is a little hard to say. Marking the place in a text. You see this droopy little tree. So this is the Creator, all right, and in the presence of whom everything withers. And the Book of Horizon, of all the books I recently reread, it's the book of Genesis told as a disaster. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he separated them. And then he separated the light from the darkness. So in Blake, all these separations are what imprisoned us, right? And so it's an account of the 7 days of creation, each about some new separation, like the creation of time. Now we have separate minutes, separate hours, separate days, separate seasons. If you go read it, they're hard to read because you can scarcely believe what it's telling you. But they're not difficult in a conceptual way. But look at this picture with what is this? This is the sun. I mean, the pictures themselves are just so astonishing.
Yeah. Can we also show plate 10? So there's another one from from a Europe of Prophecy. And so I just want to show this because this is an image that appears over and over again. It's sort of like almost the brand symbol of Blake, right?
Right.
So this is God or your reason. And what is he doing? He's creating the universe. But wait, he says, no, I'm doing it through science. I actually have a projector. I'm
doing it through measurement. And of course, it draws a circle. So I'm doing it by creating boundaries.
Exact boundaries.
By separating things from each other.
Yeah.
And then you too can live in the dismal life of separated consciousness.
Exactly. Right. But the great thing is about Blake is, he's so generous. It's still a very handsome picture, right? He's not making him like devilish. It's really lovely, and you can approach it and say, this is a great picture, but it's something he's actually portraying somebody who he disagrees with.
I don't know. When I look at it, I just think this person never ceased loving color.
Yes, color.
He just loved color. Line as well, line before color, but then color. Even if you looked at the Jerusalem a minute ago, it's like a prism is throwing all those colors out across the page of the beginning. It's time I should turn and ask some questions, but so let me just, I had so many great questions to ask. Maybe in our Friends for Eternity, we can discuss it all together. But I'm just going to ask you one last one. You spent a couple of years of your life creating this exhibition.
1 year, but it felt like a couple of
But there are two of you, so I am, in that sense, technically correct. You spent a significant period of your time working on this. And the point wasn't just to hang things on the walls. Right. The point was to create an experience. The point was so that somebody, when they got to the end of the show, wouldn't be exactly the same as they were at the beginning of the show, that somehow they would have been activated, right, by this experience. If I could just ask you, what is the single thing you most hope someone could have activated or could take away from seeing this? Tim, would you start, and then Elizabeth, would you wrap it up? Yeah. Oh. No, I called on him, but he pointed.
Sorry. Okay. So I'm very mindful, and then before I came here, I was at Beinecke Library for a long while, a lifetime, and did lots of different shows. And this is a very different experience, and a really wonderful experience where there's a lot more engagement and sort of planning, just because it's a forward-facing museum and it does larger shows with loans and things like that. I'm always mindful, maybe a little bit nervous about making sure that people feel that they can come into the exhibition. I know that sounds silly, but coming to Yale is a big thing, and we literally have ivory towers here. And some folks think, oh, I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't know how to engage this, and this can all be academic languages. And we do want to have a balance and give full credit and acknowledgement to the import of these wonderful pieces of art. But we don't want to, I think we have to be careful not to over-explain. Okay. Or say the only way into this is to read the poetry, understand the whole cast of characters. Great. So for me, it was really wanting to make sure that people could come in and just enjoy it on every level. And I think when you go through, I just see people just sort of walking through and just saying, it just looks beautiful. And that is a wonderful way to engage with Blake.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think following on that, I think there are many Blakes. Everyone can have their own Blake, and I guess I hope that people will go in and say, be surprised by the scale, at how tiny the songs of innocence are, how rich Jerusalem is, how and to really have the sense that he was someone who did all of those things. I think also following on what I said about David Bindman, right? Someone who really put all of Blake together, and in an art historical sense. But also understanding that there's these ideas.
Great. Well, can we ask you though, what was your experience when you walked through the exhibition?
I find it so amazing that however late you go in Blake's career, he's still Blake. I mean, he's doing these projects, the illustration of Book of Job, the illustration of the Divine Comedy, but that's like Milton, that's like the Bible. It's like all of a piece throughout. Still doing Jerusalem after 30 years after he did still doing the printed book. And so I feel that the main thing I've learned from this exhibition is that Blake is a person with an almost singular definiteness of genius. Yes. And his genius seems unblocked. It's not like there's good works by Blake and bad works by Blake. You know what I mean? You just feel like if it's Blake, it's on. The sense of line, the sense of color, the sense of everything being put together by a mind that's doing that. And I guess for myself, I guess that's what it probably meant when it said that he spent a lot of his time in paradise. You might say of your spouse, he's heavily internalized. Well, she could have said that. That's another way of saying he spends his life in paradise, right? He lives in his mind. His mind is seeing these things, and he has the technical virtuoso to be able to put them out there on paper.
Wonderful.
Do we have time for questions? Not
I don't
really?
know.
Well, how do you want to handle that?
2 minutes, yeah.
Of course. You understand that we can scarcely see you from down here, and so please don't take it personally if we're not giving you just the look.
Well, I can start with an online question,
Okay.
if that sounds good. Oh, I lost it. Let's see. So this is from one of our online viewers. For those etchings which had multiple levels of color beyond the watercolor enhancements, did Blake use multiple plates for each of these etchings and illustrations? And if so, do we know how many for his complex illustrations?
One plate.
One plate.
And I'll add one thing that scholarship has been hindered by is that only a section of a single plate from that process survives.
The relief etching.
Relief
So
etching.
there
So
are a lot of
much to look
ideas.
at.
There are a lot of ideas about it. And there is a theory that potentially he would ink that single plate multiple times to get it through, but yeah, it was one plate.
Sir.
Right.
Yeah,
Did he use drugs? It was the 18th century. Who didn't use drugs? I don't know. There's John Higgs, who will be here in end of October. His book, William Blake versus the World, which is lovely. And it's a very sort of nice, gentle way to get into Blake's head. He has a whole chapter about that. And he talks about
Blake and drugs.
Well, Blake, no, he's not really trying to prove it. He's saying the question is that because he has been adopted by a lot of people for the psychedelic, possibilities and the impressions of his work, and he talks about what could have been possible, at this time. I won't reveal what he says. You can come see us or read the book, but it's a question to ask because, especially in the 1960s, there was a massive sort of like surge in.
Here's a funny fact. Northrop Frye and Harold Bloom did not intend the counterculture to take place at the very moment that their scholarship was coming out, but indeed it did. And so the America in which everyone learned to tune in and drop out was the America that read Blake. And of course, Blake was regarded as a profound political thinker in the years when I was in graduate school.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
I have a couple of small questions.
Okay.
One is, can you speak to what Blake's literary diet was, and was Da Vinci part of that, either in reading about Da Vinci or reading Da Vinci? And my other question is, at what point after Blake's passing to join his friends in eternity did his works begin to be translated? And who instigated that? And were there countries or languages which wanted to absorb or alight onto his ethos more than others?
Well, I think we can probably answer the first part more adequately because we didn't go too much into the afterlife and the translations. So Blake was an autodidact, and that's a nice way to say that he didn't go to school, right? And his parents were okay with him wandering the fields along the Thames and going across the bridge and wandering. And he would see a wildflower, and then an angel would speak to him, right? So he wasn't a crazy bookworm, but he read and he was literate, and he kept reading through the rest of his life. And one really wonderful sort of subpart of there are many subparts of Blake's scholarship there are copies of his books with his annotations. And he annotated all around, and he would talk back to the book. So he was a very self-directed reader. Because he didn't go to school, he didn't have anybody like the Brodhead to sort of like guide him and say, okay, now let's talk about this. And oh yes.
And Stick, but he was delighted about that. And he was so happy not to have been flogged by fools or something like that.
So
I'm gonna have to watch the tape too.
So I think we can answer the first part of the question saying that he read all of his life. And he always had books, and people know he liked to read books, and he did engage. He knew what was happening in the world and politics, and he read Thomas Paine. He read everybody. He read Mary Wollstonecraft. He was up on the latest arguments about political and sociological developments. And he even read things that he didn't like. You know, he was well versed in the works of the people that he was pushing against, who were the realists, the deists, the sort of scientists.
And of course also his visual education. I mean, you look at you look at the drawings, the love of Michelangelo in these drawings, the love of the musculated body, the love of classical sculpture. So, I mean, he's a funny example of an outsider artist who actually was a professionally trained artist with an immense acquaintance with things one might have learned in school. I'm going to look at Martina to see if we are going to take one last question, or have we had our last one?
There's one last question.
Here's one.
Here we go.
Can you just talk about his background, his religious upbringing from Swedenborg, perhaps having a lot to do with his visionary?
Oh yeah, the question is about his association with Swedenborg. And
His parents were followers.
Yeah, and
he also was a reader of Milton.
Yeah, right. And so it's a very complex topic. But recently what I've been reading is that it's still up to debate about how closely he sort of adhered to Swedenborgism. He apparently went to one meeting with his wife. He signed a book saying, "Oh, I'd like to come to these," but there's no evidence he went back.
And then kind of wrote against him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but he was very aware of Swedenborgism as a possible way, an alternate way to think about Christianity and revelation and salvation. I mean, that's very, very short.
Now, when you mentioned Milton, this would be a good place to end with, because of course, except for the Bible, the work he knew best was Paradise Lost.
Okay, right.
And I think if you think of his aspiration to be a poet, to some extent, it is to be the Milton who outdoes Milton. Right. He wrote a book in which Milton has to return to earth and redeem himself for all his errors, and in other words, become much more Blake-like. Right. Anyway, so look, the whole point is now we live in this city that has this magnificent display. Now we have Tim Berenger and Jill Campbell about to go upstairs and tell you about their funnest works or whatever. I am hoping that word will give new currency. And only to say thanks for your attention, and my special thanks to these two splendid colleagues.
You did.